welcome to the latest episode of the South Tip Arts Podcast. Well, as you may all know, last Friday evening was Culture Night across the country, and here in Clonmel there were a number of events to mark the occasion. I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to everybody who turned out for our Arts Centre events, for visiting our John Burke retrospective exhibition, which has now closed, to everybody who attended the Creative Sound Walk with Sean Taylor, and to everyone who attended the Bijou Opera in the Main Guard. Thank you so much for your support. To the performers, to Brendan Collins, Joan O'Malley and Niall Kinsella for their amazing performance of the Bijou Opera in the Main Guard, to Sean Taylor for providing the Creative Sound Walk and workshop here upstairs in our workshop at the Arts Centre, and to everybody involved in the John Burke exhibition. Thank you so much. As part of Clonmel Junction Arts Festival's lineup for Culture Night, my guest this week, Laurence O'Dwyer, was in town to launch his new book of poetry, The Lighthouse Journal. For Culture Night, Laurence also collaborated on an interactive version of his Lighthouse Journal. Working with the Swedish app developer and game maker Malte Olsson, the Lighthouse Journal has been adapted into an interactive storybook featuring maps, photographs and videos, as well as narrated poems and original music. Donal Gallagher of Asylum Productions narrates the video and app. The Lighthouse Journal has received a number of awards, including a Van Cleef and Arpels Special Fellowship in Poetry from Bogliasco Foundation and the Yeovil Prize for Poetry. Selections from the collection have been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and a Best of the Net award. The work has also been translated into Norwegian and published in Norway's oldest literary journal, Vinduet. Laurence O'Dwyer is currently working on his third collection of poetry, the Lofoten Journal. I was delighted to catch up with Laurence to have a chat about both the Lighthouse Journal, his travels and adventures in long-distance running. Larry, it's really good to have you on the podcast. We're here in the park on a beautiful afternoon in the middle of Clonmel. You're a Clonmel man yourself.
I am. Nice to be here.
From not too far away from this exact spot where I was sitting. The Colville Road. You were brought up in the Colville Road.
Just behind the Colville Road, just on the old Spa Road.
Yeah.
That's where I was born and grew up.
And now, looking through your CV, I'm like, where do I even start to talk to you about? Because the poetry, the travel, but that's not your initial area of study, is it?
No.
So like your professional area of study is very interesting, actually.
Yeah, I guess when I finished in high school here, I did physiology, so I studied science. I was very interested in biology. And then after that, I did a PhD in neuroscience. So I was doing a lot of work in memory and memory research. So, I mean, I was writing at the same time as that, but most of my day-to-day work would be in the lab. And then I was doing a lot of MRI brain imaging. And I was in Dublin. I was there for a number of years doing that kind of research. So
that's what I wanted to ask you. Was the writing there before any of that stuff? Like, did you always write?
Yeah, I think so. I guess when I was deciding what I wanted to do, what I wanted to study, the thing was like writing from forever was my thing. So it's like, what should I do in terms of studying, going to university and what I wanted to do there? But I didn't want anyone to teach me what I wanted to do. I loved it. I knew it was going to be the thing I was going to do. Yeah. And so there's two sort of options there. I really love biology. And I figure, so if I don't go and study biology, I'm never going to, do that myself. Yeah, yeah. But I don't think, it can happen the other way around, but I don't think very often, Yeah. So that somebody, maybe, later on in their life, they say, I'm going to, learn biology or neuroscience or this kind of thing. So I just kind of, I don't know, it's not like I had some kind of master plan or something, but I just really liked the idea of studying biology, doing that, and then doing the writing myself,
Did you find the word, like, I mean, neuroscience to me is like, I can't even imagine how complicated some of the theory in that is. So was the writing a kind of the opposite of that almost? Was it a place where you kind of escaped to, or?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think maybe sometimes people are a little bit afraid by the neuroscience things, that this is like so complicated. And,
but it's such an interesting field as well, Yeah, and even the idea of memory. You used to like doing a PhD in memory. And, I mean, in terms of writing, that must have kind of fed your writing quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, so the first study was physiology, so just generally, and then I figured to do 3 years of PhD, what's the most interesting thing, for me at least, what could I do? And that was the brain and memory.
Yeah.
And of course, like, at the end of the day, this comes later, I guess, in the story, but like, what does every writer use? What does every poet use? Memory.
Yeah.
So these two things, for sure, are together. Actually, it's only now, to be honest, I think like almost like 20 years later, that there are a number of projects now where I am specifically doing neuroscience.
Tapping back into your... Yeah.
So that's like more in non-fiction work. Other bits and pieces too, but I would say that the poetry that I did myself while I was a researcher, some of it for sure would touch on elements of my work, but not really very directly, right? And so these two tracks were going on at the same time for a long time. And then I think things started to change quite a lot around 2016. So at that time I was living in the Netherlands and researching in a town there called Nijmegen. I really loved research, but I loved writing more. And so the decision then comes, do I keep going down this line of research, or do I now try and make this absolutely ridiculous decision that I want to write full time or do more writing? So at that point it's a kind of a splitting, it changes a bit,
Yeah. And do you still work in the other field at all? No, you made that decision at the time to just,
For lab research, I don't do it.
Yeah.
Right? There is a number of projects now where, I'm dealing quite specifically with neuroscience and reading the research. My work before was in Alzheimer's disease and autism mainly, right? So it's just like really, again, hesitant to use the word hardcore, but it is like basic research in that area, right? Now, it's kind of funny, I read maybe even at times more neuroscience than I did then, because it's just for the pure pleasure of it. If you're doing a day's work in the lab, you're not going to
go home
and read that much more of the latest pop science book than this. It's like, okay, I've had it. But now, I do find myself reading, to be honest, a number of books that, would always be cited in the neuroscience field from the 1950s and 1960s. You'd never get around to reading it or something. Yeah. And now I do read more of that for different reasons. So, there's lots of these mixes of things. And I remember one person saying to me at one point, do you regret that you did neuroscience? Was that a waste of time? And I was thinking, absolutely not.
No,
it was just, I still really like it.
Yeah. I don't think anything's ever a waste of time, really.
Yeah.
It's true. It all kind of takes you to somewhere else. The reason that we're here is specifically to do with your Culture Night project, which people will have just seen, and that's the Lighthouse Journal, which was commissioned by Tipperary Arts Office for Culture Night. That is based on your book of the same name, which you have in collaboration with Malte.
Yes, it's a long,
and
convoluted story. Malte is his name.
Malte. Turned into an interactive storybook, which people can click on, download. And it's lovely. It sort of takes you on the journey. It's very evocative of your journey to work on a lighthouse that was being renovated on a tiny island off the coast of Norway.
Yeah, it's a long story.
You seem to have found yourself in many diverse places, and
I guess
that must have been just an amazing experience.
It was unusual, that's for sure. It's always hard to put it in a short context, because it was really a very long journey. So I guess it started and the book starts in Nijmegen in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And the book starts with me having a beer with Malte, who was my friend in the Netherlands. He's a Swedish game developer, indie game maker from Sweden, and we actually met in language class in the Netherlands. So I was a researcher there. He was working in another business, and I met him just around the time when I had been in Nijmegen for quite some time, but I was deciding, okay, now I'm going to leave here. But I still stayed for quite a bit of time before I figured out what that was going to be. And what that was going to be was, I had seen a photograph of a very dramatic lighthouse in the end of the world, and I thought, that could be very interesting to go.
Was that sort of tied up with your decision now to move away from the neuroscience and full-time concentration?
Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely,
right.
Yeah. So it's around 2016. I just said to my boss in the lab that I am finished with research now, and I'm going to do full-time writing. Right.
Yeah.
So I was in Nijmegen writing full-time, and it's a kind of strange transition where you've been doing research for forever. It's the only main job I ever had.
Yeah.
And then I would say, like, while doing the research, I was always doing a lot of odd journeys. And the neuroscience is actually very good for that because, I mean, you have an awful lot of freedom. As long as you do a specified amount of work, no one cares about you clocking in at 9 a.m.
Right, okay,
You just do your work. And a lot of the conferences are in different parts of the world. So there's a lot of journeys in that. I guess the first book I wrote was Tractography. Also, I remember someone saying, it's a very forbidding title. It's actually, that's a technique of neuroscience, actually. That's where the title comes from. Yeah. It's a method of mapping white matter tracks in the brain.
Okay.
And if you just see the photographs of this, it's just very, very beautiful. They're like dendritic roots of a tree.
Oh, okay,
so that's kind of why I took that idea. So that was the first book. And that book itself has journeys through Lapland, also journeys through the Caribbean and Haiti. So I spent some time there. So the common thread is all of these journeys. And those journeys were done while I was still researching, sometimes full time and sometimes doing other things. But then in 2016, it's like, okay, this is just writing now. Very hard thing to try and figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And to combine it also with journeys. So when I saw this lighthouse, I thought, well, wouldn't that be an interesting journey? And again, there's not exactly a planned idea of a strategy. After I saw the photograph, I contacted the owner, and she had been renovating it for a number of years. She had bought it from the Norwegian state when, I think, like Ireland, they're decommissioning a lot of lighthouses. And I knew that she had had other people come onto the island over a number of years to do that work. And some of the idea was also that I'd been working in the lab all the time with MRI, with statistics, with mathematics. Of course, I was always outside anyway in the mountains and running and that kind of thing. But I wanted to do that kind of work on the lighthouse. Kind of
physical labor,
totally
sort of.
Different, you know? Yeah. So I have no background in whatsoever. But so that combination of getting to see a very unusual place for me inside the Arctic Circle, and then just going on that journey and saying, wow, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And I mean, I write all the time anyway. So it's just like, I guess many painters, many artists or anybody, it's just something I do all the time. So it wasn't that I would go and say, okay, I'm going to write this book called the Lighthouse Journal. It's just, I knew it's just going to write all the time anyway, and let's just see, it just sort of falls into place later on. So the book, as it takes a train journey up through the spine of Sweden. And I love night trains. There's that sense of a journey going up, and I wanted, as I was writing it later at least, it's not happening at the time, I wanted to kind of have that sort of folktale journey there. So you're going up to the north. So I went up there. I was working with my fellow lighthouse keepers. So there were two young guys, one from England, one from France. And we worked together to do many things in the lighthouse in terms of stripping the old panes out of the tower of the lighthouse and derusting it, painting it. The owner had done this for many, many years. She was away at the time. So we were just kind of like kids messing around on an island. We were working, but we did have a lot of fun too. And, I mean, it says somewhere in the book that it's like a garage, a lab, a bakery. It's just mucking around, and there's a great sense of freedom to make of it what you want, to do the work that you want.
And it was a tiny little island, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's I'll probably get this wrong now. I'm sure it is 1.34 square kilometers, something like that, right?
Tiny.
It's like a rock island.
Yeah.
And then there's also the paradox in that, though, because when it's 6 miles off of the Norwegian mainland, and then it's true, you say that it is this rock island, and I'm a long distance mountain runner.
Yeah,
So
it's
what
where
the
you're
hell
going
am
to
I
run.
going to do? which also kind of brings up some things, because Elena, the owner, said, "What, you could kayak over to the Big Island." And it's like, honestly, like, well, what's more exotic than that? You're on this island and you kayak over to a bigger one.
Like pull through, eat your heart out.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's really, really nice. But what I want to say about the paradox of tininess of that island is that, yes, it is tiny, but even when you're there, it has these little valleys in it, and it's actually much, much bigger. I was surprised. Yes, it is still tiny, but I could...
How big it felt.
If I could, scramble up, quite a steep grassy slope and do this and run around this. So it's, I think it comes into some of the other poems, some of the other work that I do. I have an obsession with maps, right? So maps are all over. They're in the app as well. You have maps of that region. And so I guess the obsession with maps is for many reasons, but it's also neuroscience, because I was working on maps of the brain, right? And then when you think of maps of the brain and you think of atlases for geographic maps, it's all about magnification, and so that when you go in deep into something, like I would, I'm just present now on this island that looks like a penny when I am in Ireland and looking at it when it's here. It's that sort of orange effect where I say, oh, look at all the little ripples in this orange, So there's that kind of exploration of the island itself. We're living on that island. I mean, the interesting thing is that I make this, and it's quite a short period of time. So we're working on that, and we're doing that work. And I'm reading as well about the history of that place. So one of the things, and Malte, I think, really understood this, is that I didn't want this to be nostalgia sepia, right? Yeah. For better or worse, everybody understands the lighthouse, right? This romantic idea. And as the owner, Elena, will be the first person to tell you, like, the lighthouse is not an especially romantic thing. I mean, it's a very difficult thing in order for her to live there, in order for anyone to be in that area. It might be their home, and it is their home also for the villagers there, but it's also a harsh environment, you know? So part of the book, maybe it might be interesting to say, is that there was a golden age on the island in the late 19th century, and that was when there was, for a tiny island, there was quite a population. I'm not sure exactly, I think it was maybe 200 people or so. Wow. There was a shop there, Per Anderson's shop shows up in this book. There was trade from Russians who came from Archangel, and they were doing... they were trading with locals for fish, for the Orthodox monasteries needed fish on feast days back up in the Kola Peninsula. So that's all in the late 19th century. Then that golden age disappears, and then more towards the 50s, the Norwegian government starts to encourage people in different areas, but there especially, to leave because it's just too expensive to maintain them. Okay. So then that island was... Deserted. So the people were given the chance, okay, here's your house on the mainland, and then it's a deserted island. Yeah. So then my notion of it, and I guess I should be kind of clear on this, is that, I mean, this is also a folktale, right? I think I say somewhere this is loosely based on events that may be true. Like, who knows at this stage what's true or what's not. But the idea in my mind was that, okay, I am here in the 21st century. Sometimes, yes, looking back to the late 19th century, but it's also about the future of it. There's Wi-Fi on the island. There's a poem about a drone. These people that I'm working with are young people. This isn't, a Peg Sayers story. Not that there's anything wrong with Peg Sayers, but that's not what it is, And it's, maybe there's a bit in between where there's a kind of a blank almost, and then there's a piece in the story where it goes, well, what is a deserted island? Is it paradise or is it collapse? So these two things are there. So we can think of like Easter Island or Robinson Crusoe or what it is, that kind of paradise. And then there's also elements of collapse too. So it's this kind of merging of two things there, Of course, that all comes on later. I was there working, and when you're there working, I really enjoyed it, but you're physically very tired.
Yeah,
And I was also trying for mountain running.
Right.
So, I wasn't teasing out the finer philosophical points of, of paradise every moment of the day.
Yeah. I mean, you must have had moments when you just went, oh my God, look where I am, standing on the top of that lighthouse, looking around.
Yeah, it is stunning. It really, really is stunning. And the location of it is that it's looking across the sea to the Lofoten archipelago, which is sort of a long boat ride across the water. And I went there later after I stayed on the lighthouse. But for the time on the lighthouse, now we went back and forth to the mainland every now and then for different reasons, for recycling of the glass. I had to go to a medical center. We needed to get supplies. We have to go, even though it sounds like it's maybe quite romantic and far away, then I will shatter everyone's illusion when I say, well, we had to go to the spar.
Yeah.
You know, so there's a village with a spar.
Yeah.
And then you have to get the provisions for the week and then go back, you know. But when we're on the little island, the two lighthouse keepers, renovators that I was with, they're also interested in mountains. One is a surfer, one does a lot of mountaineering, and I'm obsessed with mountains. The Lofoten Mountains, I mean, they're just these gorgeous white snow mountains rising from the sea. So always there was a kind of a longing, I mean, it's a beautiful place where we are, but there's also a longing to go and explore Lofoten.
Yeah.
So that came later. It's not in this book, but I mean, I hope to do some work on that, and I am doing work on that.
But you did get to do that.
Yeah, so the last poem of this book is about me sort of celebrating the end by just going on the mainland and having a beer. And then the next day I leave for Lofoten. And I have published some poems from Lofoten itself. And that's a completely other story than obviously related, but I spent a month traveling through Lofoten, and then some really, really great stories, some really, really great people. Stayed with a baker for a while, and he was into a lot of mountaineering, and so we did a lot of different hikes together. I stayed with a local family GP who she had a house called the Telegraph House, which was the old telegraph house from the 1890s, and she very kindly let me stay in her house, and sometimes would bring me to a fjord, and I can use her map, and she would go back to work and say, well, now you have to get back home over the mountain, you know? So that's the sort of second half of that journey, let's say. But this book, The Lighthouse Journal, it is the time from Nijmegen in the Netherlands up through Sweden, then that work on the island, and then sort of just ending at the end of it. So they're all kind of journeys, you know. And then I guess with the app then...
that must have been a big departure for you. Did you ever work in that sort of space before? And the game as well. Like, this is such an unusual concept, but it's interesting, you know?
Yeah. So towards the last year or so of my time in Nijmegen, I was I'm really good friends with Malte Olsson, who is aka Makela, so it's Makela Studios. And so we were very good friends. We talk rubbish in the pub on a Friday night, speaking really bad Dutch, or we used to anyway. And he was making his first independent game since having his own company in Sweden.
Right.
And he was saying to me, like, I have this thing, Little White Rocket, and it needs something else. What do you think? Could you maybe think of something for this? So we started to collaborate on this completely different project now, but this is a game about a little astronaut lost in space and searching for home. And so I wrote some poems for that game. So I did some poems for that game. He really liked them. And then, as you can hear my voice...
But hadn't you like an expert? I was just reading the kind of blurb on it earlier, and there was a lady who you had...
Oh, yeah.
So there is a bit of neuroscience involved in that, you could say, couldn't you? I mean...
well, that story was that we had made it in in Nijmegen. So I had written the poems for it. Just to bring a link to Ireland, I guess, is that Malte also wanted a nice voice for it. And so then we came to Ireland to record the poems with my friend Donal Gallagher from Asylum Productions. So then the game gets made with Donal's voice, and then when it gets out there, it's the Dutch press. They wrote, there was one article that was nicely done about it, and they wanted to interview somebody about the game. I used to work at the Donders Neuroscience Centre.
Yes.
And so they interviewed somebody who was not a colleague of mine, but she was a professor of pedagogy and an expert in childhood disorders. And she uses gaming in her work. So she uses gaming through biofeedback with games in order to try to lessen anxiety in different disorders. So they gave the game to her and said, well, what do you think?
Yeah, and that was quite an interesting kind of actually I may go and download it later on, just because I don't do games as a rule, but I really like the concept of this is for relaxation and even just a lovely voice like Donal's speaking.
Yeah, it's a great voice.
So it's definitely something I wanted to investigate further.
Yeah, just a quick thing on the relaxation and Malte. I always like his rules. So, I'm from Sweden, and his rule was that you cannot die, and it must be melancholy.
Okay, right.
It's not so melancholy, but I think there's he has a long history in gaming, right? And he was talking about a lot of games getting really wound up, and sometimes you want that.
Yeah.
And this was he wanted to make
the opposite.
The opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, work with him, but I still know very little about gaming, but what I would call the kind of radioactive games, that you see, like if I watch somebody in a bus or a train, they're often playing things that are like really fast and buzzing,
and you're against the clock and the pressure. Yeah.
So, but he was trying to make something completely the opposite of this. So.
That's released and everything and available to download. Can you get that on the App Store or whatever?
That's in the Google Play and the Apple App Store. That's been there for is it a year and a half or something like that? So that's there. Yeah, so that's, I mean, it's great to work with Malte. And then so the Lighthouse Journal, I mean, when I was writing that, just simply as a book, right? So the writing of this started in 2017. The idea of the app and the film for Culture Night, I mean, it's very recent. It's just from this year and just from a few months back, really. And I approached Malte with that idea. So, before we made this game, how about we make a book into not a game, but something that incorporates elements of what we've done.
Yeah.
And then, so he's done really, really great work in putting the poems into the app format. And then it's quite a lot of work in order to think through how you scroll through things, get visually. You also have to think about compromises. For me, I don't mean that in a bad way, but you can't put them all in the very same way that they are in the book because of constraints of space. So then if you're writing poetry, I mean, every line break means something to you. Every enjambment means something to you. So there's certain cases where I have to say, okay, well, this is what it is like in the book, but because of a phone screen, it has to be different. And the interesting thing for me is that there are some cases there with working with the sort of digital spatial setup on a phone that Malte can make things that I wouldn't expect. So there's one poem it's called The Jigger. And it's about a mechanical tool that, it moves in a circle and you're using that for standing and different purposes. And that moves around in a circle on the text. And it's like, I think that's quite nice. You have to be careful not to overdo it and not to overburden people and to see what's going to flow right. But that experience on the phone is just it's different to a book.
Totally different. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be worse. I mean, it can be things. There may be some compromises. There's enjambment or where a line ends, but then there's additions. So then he has come up with some things that I thought, it's really nice how you move it sideways and how maybe that's sort of complementary to some of the ideas that you're moving on this boat in this poem and you're going over this direction.
It's a lovely thing. So what's next? I would
What's
say.
next? Yeah.
More travels?
Let's see. Well, that's the thing. I spent some time in the Tyrone Guthrie Centre,
Oh, lovely,
courtesy of
yeah.
Tipperary County Council
Very
Arts
nice.
Bursary.
Yeah.
And now it's like I have to pick out the project that I want to do. And I mean, I have a number of projects lined out. One is to continue on the work from Lofoten. Right? So there's some poems there. That's one area that's fairly clear. I have a new work coming out about, one poem about a Catalan butterfly.
Lovely.
So I do a lot of running in the Pyrenees. And when I was running in the Pyrenees, I met a lepidopterist, so a specialist in butterflies.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a really, really interesting character. And because of meeting him and talking to him, I started to really get into the idea of butterflies within the Pyrenees. And I spent a lot of time in the Pyrenees. So I spent one residency in the Rensing Center in South Carolina writing one poem about every butterfly in a handbook of butterflies.
Okay, right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so each butterfly, it's about the butterfly, but it lets me tell a story about some people in the Pyrenees or some trail in the Pyrenees. So it's like a personal geography.
Yes, yeah.
So they were done, it's called 50 Catalan Butterflies.
50
because there are 50
Yeah,
Catalan
yeah.
butterflies. And one of them will be published in a little while, and it's a bit of a hard thing to explain, but because of the time I spent in the Pyrenees and in Catalonia, I have a very strong interest in the history of anarchy.
Right.
Because anarchist thinking has a long, long and very noble history in Catalonia. Right? And the lepidopterist I met, he had a very unusual sentence once when he said, "Well, I'm an anarchist lepidopterist."
What a combination.
And I really liked this. I thought this was really, really interesting. So what I started to do was to look more closely at the Spanish Civil War, history of George Orwell's time in Barcelona, the anarchist movement there, the socialist movement there, and then to try and weave in the history of Spain and Catalonia through these butterflies.
Yeah.
So maybe the most furthest distant thing from that sort of hard arm of anarchy you could think of would be a butterfly. And then the poem that will come out quite shortly is linking these two things. And there is a certain person talking about anarchy every day of the week, right? And so the word is much maligned, let's say, right? And so that poem is looking at, well, what does it mean in terms of political thought, in terms of freedom, in terms of independence, and in terms of a butterfly, and in terms of where we are at now, So it's funny how a little butterfly flies off in these directions, right? So I'm working on that, and take a long, long time, I think, to move through that project. But I have 2 weeks in Tyrone Guthrie and do some work on that.
Oh, very good, very good. It all sounds amazing.
I mean, there are other projects. Sometimes I think it's sort of bad luck to talk about
things.
Feeling,
No, I totally get you. If people want to find you or just, read some more of your work, where's the best place for them to connect with you? Like, do you have a website? Is there...
Yeah, actually, I don't have a website. There is a number of web pages with my work.
Yeah. Well, in a quick Google search of your name, just tons of stuff came up, so I was able to find all kinds of things. So a quick Google search will find everything we need to know about Larry O'Dwyer. Thanks a million for your time today, and best of luck with the new stuff, and keep in touch with us. And,
thank you very much.
Next time you're back in town, come see us.
Good talking to you.
You too.
Coming up this very weekend is Carmel Applefest, which is on right now, began on the 24th of September and runs until the 27th. And the team are excited to bring you a 2020 programme that spans across a variety of different platforms: Zoom, Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. You can see the full brochure and lineup at clonmelappleFest.ie, where you can download your brochure and plan out your weekend. Here at South Tipperary Arts Centre, we're delighted to feature the Wild and Wondrous exhibition, which is part of this year's Applefest. The exhibition will run until the 3rd of October and here you can discover the work of original artists who explore and evoke through their art the mysteries and limits of what is wild in a world where increasingly the human encroaches into the natural world. Artists featured include Azalea Chiodi Dance Company, Blanche Starling, Paulette O'Donovan and Peter Binder. The exhibition is curated by Treasia Guschelbauer and the gallery is open 10 to 5 p.m. daily and admission is free. Once again, if you want to see the full lineup for this year's Applefest, visit clonmelapplepfest.ie. If you'd like to get in touch with the podcast, the email address is southttipartspodcast@gmail.com. That's southttipartspodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you and we'll talk to you all again next time.